How is it to embark on a PhD after spending several years outside of the academic bubble? Today we will talk to Jennifer Hinton, who spent 8 years outside of academia before returning to university. How did she feel about going back? Was it difficult? And could it even be an advantage not to do a PhD straight after your master's? So we're here to talk to you about your life as a PhD student, and in your case, coming back into that sort of bubble after many years outside in another world, as you can put it that way. But first, give us a summary of your research and what your thesis about, relationship to profit, a theory of business, markets, and profit forces, social, ecological economics. And de-jargon that for us a little bit.
De-jargon it. Yeah, so in the thesis, I put forward this theory. I developed a theory called relationship to profit theory. And in a nutshell, it's basically looking at the way that societies relate to profit and how that relationship affects global sustainability issues like pollution and resource use and inequality. And so specifically, I look at the difference between for-profit forms of business and not-for-profit forms of business, given that in the current economy, it's dominantly a for-profit economy. It's made up of for-profit businesses. And so how do those institutional differences scale up when we talk about sustainability problems? There's a lot of talk of transnational corporations and the pollution they create and these sorts of things. So I wanted to look at this in terms of the legal institutional elements of the difference between for-profit and not-for-profit forms of business. So.
And you're plowing new ground with this. We're going to look at this later, but in your defense, someone said that if you did this 10 years ago, you would have been a lunatic. You would have been crazy to do this 10 years ago. Yet now, it seems to be a more appealing and more possibilities to do this kind of research.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. One reason is the sustainability crises are, they're just getting worse. Ecological problems, climate change, biodiversity loss, they just keep getting worse. Same with inequality. But I also think that the global financial crash of 2007 was something that really shook the whole world, and including the world of economics and business, where people increasingly question, does the current model really work? Does the system that we have right now really work the way we need it to? And so now there's this whole new opening for thinking in different ways about the economy and business. So.
And how did you get interested in this topic?
It's a long story. I'm going to try to shorten it. So I did a master's in sustainability science in Lund. Back from 2006 to 2008 was when I graduated. And my master's thesis was actually, I had already gotten interested in looking at the economic dimensions of sustainability. So I wrote my master's thesis about the circular economy and product service systems, how we can sell services instead of the ownership of products. And I realized coming out of that it wasn't enough, that we still have this elephant in the room of economic growth, that as long as, no matter how circular we make the economy, if we're still trying to grow it, it's not going to fit within the ecological limits of the planet. So this growth problem really had come to the fore of my mind with the master's work. Then fast forward a little bit, I end up in Greece. I met my Greek husband during the program in Sweden, and I moved to Greece to be with him, and the economic crisis hits in 2010. And so the question of how do we create an economic system that fits within the ecological limits of the planet, but also serves human well-being and is resilient to shocks like the global financial crash or crisis. So this really had me thinking. I joined the Post-Growth Institute, which is an international network of researchers and activists who are passionate about finding ways beyond the growth-based economy, and wrote a book with them outlining the idea of a not-for-profit world economy, or a not-for-profit market economy. And how might that be different from the system we have now? And so that was sort of the first step in building this theory, which I did with Donnie McClurkin at the Post-Growth Institute. And then this PhD opportunity came up, and it just was perfect to go further and deeper into trying to understand what are the differences between for-profit and not-for-profit forms of business in how they might drive larger dynamics that are relevant for sustainability.
Did anything surprise you when you went back in to do academic work?
Yeah, some things that surprised me. I mean, so people had told me, so I had obviously friends who were researchers in academia before I started the PhD. And some people had mentioned it like, oh, it's such a bubble, or, you know. And so I was actually surprised at how much it does actually feel like a bubble when you get back into, or when I got back into academia, that it is like its own little world with the conferences and the whole publishing industry and learning the ropes of the peer review process and all of that. So it is really its own little world, and that's been surprising.
Did you mean, again, you know, for 8 years approximately, you were outside of that bubble. Do you think that was an advantage? Or a disadvantage, perhaps?
No, I think it was an advantage in a few ways. Like the first way is maybe, so a lot of our colleagues in academia are talking about, oh, you know, how can we make our ideas connect with the real world? And I've never felt that disconnection, because it's always been very much rooted. And I didn't mention this before, but while I was writing that book with the Post-Growth Institute, I was also doing work with the social economy networks in Greece. So, you know, really on the ground practical things tied to this idea making or creation process. So I've never felt that disconnection.
How was it to both live and work then in Greece, to live and work in a country that at the same time went through enormous difficult financial troubles? How was that?
Yeah, no, it was very difficult, and it's also a big part of why I'm doing the work that I'm doing, is having experienced that sort of financial crash in such a visceral way, because we were living in downtown Athens in a neighborhood called Exarchia. If any Greeks are watching this, they know that. And so the crisis was right at our doorstep. I mean, you could feel it as soon as the economy started falling apart. You could see it on the streets around where we were living, with the demonstrations, but also increasing numbers of people sifting through the garbage and living on the streets, and our friends losing their jobs and all of this. So we experienced it in a very personal way. I couldn't find work even. So living through that only put more fuel in my fire to find systems that work, and to take this very seriously, because I saw, and I even experienced to some little extent, the human cost of an economy that doesn't work. So for me, it's just been more inspirational and more motivational than anything. And it also was a chance for, you know, the social economy that was already there under the surface in Greece before the crisis to come to the surface when, you know, when the formal economy and the for-profit economy really started cracking and falling apart. These social networks and the community economy came up and really saved a lot of people in a lot of ways. There were community kitchens, community pharmacies, you know, doctors were volunteering their time to do sort of community healthcare. And so to see that and experience it and even participate in it to some extent, that's also the time when this, now it's an annual event, but it's the Festival of the Social and Solidarity Economy in Greece, started during the crisis. And I was there and participating in that. So it was inspirational in that sense as well, like both positive and negative.
How much does that shine through, or even is maybe even a proper part of your thesis?
That part is only, unfortunately, a few sentences in the preface, because it's really, I needed to focus on the theory. But it's definitely
in between the lines.
In between the lines, for sure, yeah.
So this became fuel to your PhD fire of
Yes.
sorts, and you decided to do a PhD here in Sweden and at Stockholm Resilience Center. I want to talk to you a little bit about your experience with doing a PhD, and what's the best thing about doing a PhD?
The best thing, goes back to exactly what I was looking for in a PhD, is to have the time and the space and the security to think, and to have 4.5 or 5 years almost to just read and soak it in and put the pieces together and do that intellectual work that is so needed in the world right now, to have, sort of build an alternative vision of what we can have. So that's been amazing.
What about the worst thing?
The worst thing. Well, one thing that comes to mind is the for-profit publishing system in academic publishing. It kind of drives me nuts, having to jump through all of those hoops. But the other thing I think was maybe just at this last year and trying to get things into shape, and you just feel the time crunch closing in, because I think I did get used to having that space and time, and then it's like, oh no, actually I only have a number of months left now, so that was kind of difficult. But I think everybody's experience, that's what's nice about that question, is everybody would answer it so differently. So.
Do you think it's, would you recommend to do what you did? Take a sort of a break from academia and come back?
I think there are pros and cons, but for me, I think I would. Because from my experience, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I had already created the foundation for what I wanted to do, and it was just about taking that further and deeper. So again, with this roller coaster experience, those existential crises never got too low for me, because I had a sturdy foundation from before the PhD for wanting to do the work that I was doing. And the other thing is going back to this feeling of not feeling disconnected from the real world. Always knowing exactly how my work connects to the real world, and having those connections, in my networks with people on the ground, working in other sectors. So. And
you also mentioned the cons. What do you think, what are the biggest ones?
Yeah, so I mean, there are some things where I felt kind of awkward. I even had to ask some of the master's students sometimes, or people who were very fresh in their PhDs, like, how do you do this again? I forgot how, you are supposed to use this referencing system, or, these sorts of things. When I did my master's, I don't think Mendeley or Zotero even existed, like these referencing systems, so I had to learn those all from scratch and stuff. Whereas people who were coming straight from their masters were already, good to go with all of that stuff. So.
Few technical obstacles almost.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your defense. How did you prepare for your defense?
So I prepared for my defense by asking other people who had recently defended what their suggestions would be. Everybody sort of says the same thing, read about your opponents and your committee, make sure you're familiar with their work so you can try to anticipate what kinds of questions they'll ask you. That said, in the field of sustainability, we are covering so much ground as researchers, and so are all of our opponents and committee members. So even if you read their work, it's usually very broad, and so it's still hard to anticipate what kinds of questions they might ask. And definitely I reread my thesis, because you write it and you're like, okay, I'll never forget it, because it was such a not painful, but such an intense process to write. But then when I reread it just before, like a few days before the defense, it was kind of surprising how much I had already sort of forgotten or, needed to refresh.
Were you nervous?
Extremely. I'm not sure I've ever been more nervous in my life. Yeah.
What about those preparing for defense right now? What kind of advice would you give to someone?
I would say, just research your committee members, reread your thesis, maybe a couple of times if you can, and just when I reread my thesis, it actually gave me a lot of confidence. It's like, oh, actually, I did pretty good work. So that should give you the confidence boost that you need and prepare you. I also identified some of the weaknesses and prepared myself to talk about those weaknesses. So that's it. There was another good piece of advice that a PhD student gave me, that you should drink something sugary after you give your presentation, because you'll have had this adrenaline rush. And when you're coming down from that, you need something to get you through this whole discussion that you're about to have. So drink something sugary.
Drink something sugary. Right, good advice. Let's talk about your relationship with the people around you who support you and are helping you, and specifically your supervisors. How would you describe your relationship with your supervisors?
Good. I mean, we became friends. I have heard other people's stories that were not very good. They've had bad experiences with their supervisors, bad relationships. But I feel really blessed that Sarah, my main supervisor, and Arnaud, my supervisor at my French university, we all got along very well. And we became friends. And over the course of the years, you can become quite good friends. So it's a good relationship. They gave me a lot of support, especially in navigating the academic system, having come from sort of a different world for a while. So, yeah, no, it was good.
We've spoken to Sarah Cornell, who works at the Stockholm Resilience Center. Let's see what she says.
Okay.
Hi, Sarah. Great to see you.
It's nice to see you too, Sturla.
And indeed, yesterday, Jennifer finally defended her thesis and graduated. She's now Dr. Jennifer Hinton. How does that feel for you as a supervisor?
It is really, really such a happy day. It was, it's been such a difficult year in so many ways, with COVID and delays with publication processes and everything else. So it was just really, really thrilling to have the milestone passed. I think another bit of the feeling is very much that I suppose I was expecting it to almost feel like an ending, the end of a phase, but it was just such a wonderful discussion, and it feels like really a new window ahead of opportunity, not just for Jen, but for a whole field of research.
Tell us about how the defense went yesterday.
It was really, really excellent. I mean, the quality of the discussion was good, as always. Our examination panel came from a huge range of disciplines, from ecological economics to public economics, the kind of, macroeconomics kind of field, political science and business studies. And the conversation covered philosophy, history of the economy, and of course, a lot of questions around sustainability and transformation too. But the whole thing was just such a warm conversation. I mean, I think really showed how sustainability science matters for the world. And that's very much about the way that Jen has done the research and how she communicates about it.
It is indeed in many ways a wide area of research, but at the same time, quite a new area. I think we can say this. I mean, someone had a rather original comment during the actual defense of that. If indeed she did this 10 years ago, she would have been what?
A lunatic. That made us laugh, I have to say, out loud. Jen's PhD work is on post-growth economies. And I think, the examiner was absolutely right. 10 years ago, the idea that there'd be something other than growth as the purpose of an economy really was quite fringe. But now, right now, in these times, the discussion is really very intense about how we can go beyond GDP or beyond the forms of capitalism that we have at the moment. And Jen's research is right there, right at the forefront.
And how does it fit, you think, with SRC's wider research?
And it nestles right in there. I mean, obviously, in some ways, people don't think of SRC researchers as focusing on these topics of business and markets and profit. But a lot of our work is really looking at how those issues work in the real world. So Jen comes with a theory foundation for thinking about the relationships of business in a post-growth economy. And so at the heart of her work is obviously thinking about things as systems, as social ecological systems. She's been thinking very much about institutions, and obviously that's another area of research where we're very, where we think very hard about how the world can steer itself and how it organizes itself for making change. And I suppose the change aspect is the other big theme. A lot of Jen's work was about transformation and what would a transformed system look like.
I want to talk to you a little bit more about the relationship between you as a supervisor and the student, in this case, Jennifer. First off, how would you describe Jennifer as a person?
Jennifer is absolutely wonderful. I suppose I need to describe that a little bit more fully for you, don't I? She has really been instrumental in building a sense of community among everybody who she works with. Her project was part of a big European PhD network, and I would say very much the students that are part of that network feel like a family, largely because Jen has really made sure that the conversations are always inclusive, they're always very open, and she brings a kind of a real clarity to the way that she connects with people. That also shows in her writing. So kind of she is an absolute pleasure to work with because she thinks and speaks and kind of acts in ways that all make sense together.
That's not bad, is it?
That's not bad. I have learned so much from her, I have to say. I mean, you asked about the relationship between supervisor and student. And when people talk about it, they kind of imagine that there's a kind of a hierarchy, you know, kind of a supervisor boss and a student underling. And I think at the stage of a PhD, obviously, that's a formalism in the way that universities are structured. But I always feel, I mean, especially with Jen, that it's a process of mutual learning.
For the final question, I'm going to give you the opportunity to give Jennifer some advice now that she has indeed graduated. What would that be?
Carry on exactly as you are. I have to say that's what the examination panel also said. I mean, there was such a strong feeling of optimism at the end of Jen's defense, with the idea that she has so much material documented and written down, and the big challenge that she faces ahead now is how to bring it to the big wide world. I certainly can't advise her on how to do that. I can just say we're standing here cheering with every step she takes, whichever direction she goes in.
Some really nice words from Sarah. Carry on exactly as you are, and we are cheering on you, etc. Some really nice words from Sarah there. Any reflections yourself?
No, I mean that just feels really good, and it does feel so nice to feel so supported through such an intense experience, and to have that support going forward. So yeah.
And tell us a little bit more now. Then, what are your plans?
So a few things. I would love to carry on doing research, you know, to actually put this theory to use in research, because that's obviously one of the the jumping off points from having finished writing a theory or developing a theory is how do we use it now? And of course I finished the thesis with lots of recommendations for how it can be used. So I would like to carry on with research if I can. But I think I also really want to get these ideas out to the world, to the big wide world, as Sarah said. So I would like to write a popular book based on these ideas and get these ideas out to the general public where they can be debated and discussed and maybe work their way into action more. So
that would be really exciting.
Yeah.
Tell me, the final question to you, what kind of advice would you give to someone who is considering doing a PhD?
Yeah, I would say the most important thing is to make sure that you love the topic that you will be studying for the next 4 or 5 years or however long. Because the PhD is really this sort of a roller coaster ride of ups and downs, and if you don't have a solid foundation of motivation and inspiration and love for your topic, then those downs can be really difficult to get through. And a lot of people don't finish their PhDs because they don't have something to get them through those low points. So make sure you love your topic.
Make sure you love your topic. Good advice. Jennifer, thank you so much, and best of luck to your book project if that comes through, and indeed anything else that you were doing.
Thank you so much, Sturla.
Thank you. So, Jennifer used her time in Greece as fuel to the fire for her own PhD. But whether or not you do the same as her and take a break from academia to take her advice to heart, make sure you love the topic you study.